These are the last games for this stage, and we're going to be talking about overall predictions and along with potential map vetoes because I feel like every team has been playing mind games and trying to test their map pool, but also like give and take. We're going to get straight into it, and it's going to be Foot and Energy. Overall, these teams, they're kind of like polar opposites. Energy is very standard, very default heavy, while Foot is very explosive and is willing to take a lot of map space and like not really care about the opponent and what they're trying to fight for. And so I feel like Energy is very capable of handling Foot. I feel like they have been able to handle aggressive teams like a Prime, a Crew, and be able to handle like a Paper X in Santiago. If we go back to it, which we don't have enough time for, but uh, Energy is able to handle these explosive teams. I think Mata is the person that needs to step up in this because there's going to be a lot of one-on-one engagements no matter what maps they do eventually play. But if we look at the map veto for this one was a little bit um not really straightforward because I know that Foot tend to favor Haven as their map choice, but I feel like a lot of teams can, for potentially their last game of Masters London, can throw a curveball in here. And so my first theory is that if Energy pick first, obviously their permaban is split. Foot is gonna pick Breeze, and then Energy has been a really good team on Pearl, even though they lost to Lev, and then most likely Foot picks Haven. From here, these can be interchanged because Energy has played Lotus before, and so they can throw a curveball and eventually pick Lotus if we just stick to the top right here. They can throw it on Lotus, which can throw off Foot, and they're very capable of playing an Ascent, and also Foot is very capable of playing an Ascent. But I feel like most likely these teams are gonna favor the game or the maps that they're most likely comfortable on. And so Energy, typically EMEA isn't really good at Pearl, and so oftentimes I've seen that Foot will play Pearl, but often on a decider map. And most likely, since these teams have their perma ban, they're not going to deviate from their original ban. So Energy, they're going to stick with that. The other three maps, these other three maps besides Haven I feel like are interchangeable for Energy. But with the way that the ban works out, I feel like Fracture will be the last map to play because as Foot will most likely favor Fracture rather than Lotus, even though they've been floating it in their later bans, and their second half bans. And then on the flip side, you can see that most likely it's gonna remain the opposite, as Energy are most likely gonna play Fracture if they even are the B team because they have a lot of tape on Foot because they played Foot had played Fracture against Vitality and Full Sense, and so there's a lot of footage. They're most likely gonna But these teams are most likely gonna pick and allow the maps that have a lot of footage. With two maps in two instances where they play the same comp, then it's most likely going to be a comfort choice for Energy and something they can prep for. So there's not going to be a lot of variety unless Energy most likely or Foot decide to throw in a curveball. But again, within a day less of prep, unless there's a huge change, because Energy has played Split before, but they have lost. The last time they played was in round 2 of their group stage, and they have lost to Furia and Crew. And so they could potentially throw in Split in there because, they may have been practicing this whole time or trying to develop it. Again, it's very possible for Energy to pick into Fracture with this comp, most likely because obviously this was in a Neon meta, but they still were able to win against 100 Thieves. And in this scenario, obviously this is for Americas, and in that point, there's a lot of things could change. So most likely they can pick into Fracture, which would they be heavily favored just because it's been a really long time. Even though they floated against Shilai, I feel like they have the advantage going into Fracture since Foot has put a lot of film on it, and there isn't really anything recent that Foot can go off of for Energy. And so next we're gonna go into Global, and for Global has been pretty prominent on their ban of Lotus. I feel like Global has a pretty decent map pool when it comes to a lot of their matchups because compared to XLG where they love a Lotus or a split, oftentimes I look back on the previous matches because I haven't visually like watched them when they played in China, but looking back on the previous matches, if a team doesn't ban Lotus, then they're gonna pick Lotus. But if a team bans Lotus, they're most likely gonna pick Split. And GE loves Split. It's probably one of their favorite maps besides Pearl. And there is a scenario where if it goes the normal way, where leans into comfort and knows, okay, XOG just played on Split, they can view and watch the Split and then anti it and prep against it. They can play against a team that they already know how they're generally going to play. And so they can pick a Split, and then XOG. In this scenario, from what I've looked back on, XOG hasn't been in a scenario where a team has banned Lotus and the other team has also picked Split. And so it's very hard to say where they end up going because they can go within these four maps. They can go in each pivot, but most likely they're going to not pick a Pearl. I noticed that in their second bans, when it comes to that, they often either ban Breeze or ban Pearl. Most likely they're going to ban Pearl in this instance because GE tends to favor Pearl. But in the instance where it's the opposite way, where GE are picking last or second and XLG are banning first, both are gonna go to their perma bans. GE has floated a Lotus before, but again, since XLG have been probably one of the strongest teams on Lotus with their triple Senti comp, they're most likely gonna lean away from it. Unless they feel like they have a hard read and have been scrimming against it. I feel like pretty comfortable against it. Most likely you don't want to take that gamble. And so if XLG get the first, then they're most likely going to pick Split, and then GE are going to pick Pearl. And then, as you can see, a common theme, or at least the most consistent thing that I've come up with, is that the third map will most likely be Fracture, just because XLG have recently won against Fracture and they feel the most comfortable on it as a second pick if they're not playing Split or Pearl. So most likely they will lean into Fracture unless they want to throw in a curveball and play Haven. Both teams have been floating a Haven, but it's been a while since she has played it, and it doesn't seem like they have been favored in it because the last time they played it was against Paper Rex, but they played an ISO comp, and it doesn't seem like that was a serious comp that they're trying to look and to use forward. And so I think, yeah, it comes down to maybe an odd scenario where maybe GE decides to throw a curveball because they're also, I feel like their best maps are Split, Pearl, Breeze. And so in none of the scenarios, I can't see where XOG are willing to let Breeze open as a third map unless GE picks it as their second, or basically their first pick. In this scenario where their second pick, I feel like they can open up a Breeze, but most likely XOG bans their Pearl, which leaves them at a disadvantage because I feel like Pearl is probably, their go-to map if they do want, a definite 1-0. Like basically a map to clinch with. Because I don't think if like the way the GE are rolling, then they get a loss against XOG on a Pearl. In the odd scenario where GE decide to ban Fracture, then most likely Haven will remain. But that is, to me, that wouldn't make sense in a scenario where there's a lot of tape, or there's recent tape on XOG on the Fracture. And the way that GE played against Lev, I feel like they are, but most likely, 8 to 7 out of opponents that they play on Fracture, they most likely win that map. But since they played a Lev that has really good team fighting and individual play, then obviously they do lose that game. So yeah, now we'll just go back to quick predictions, just because I think for each game it does go to 3 maps. If we go back to the map videos, I feel like Energy most likely take it to 3. I don't think there's a scenario where they can clinch in 2. Depending on if they decide to throw a curveball, maybe it's possible, but most likely it goes to 3. And from there, honestly, I think it just comes down to experience, and energy is able to make it out either in a dominant map 3 or a back and forth map 3. I don't think there's a scenario where energy are in a rough spot, unless the only way if energy is in a rough spot throughout the 2 maps, then it's highly likely that Foot win. Foot has to dominate 2-0 in order to be able to win against energy, because I even see a scenario where maybe energy loses their potential the first map, whether it goes Foot or energy, and they bounce back second map and lead the momentum with their experience into a third map. So primarily the win condition is for Foot to win in 3. And then for global, I think it's very likely, and I feel like most people would expect 2-0, but depending on how the map veto goes, I feel like it most likely goes into 3, because XLG has a really good split and a really good Lotus, and obviously they're scrim partners, and so they can, even though I feel like global would have a general good overall international play, I feel like XLG may be good regionally and may, since they have the tendencies of the other team, they'd be able to edge out GE on a split. But if it goes to Pearl on the second map, then obviously GE can go and probably dominate that map. And then if it goes to the third map, then I think personally I would favor GE, but I think it can go to a flip coin, just because oftentimes we've seen in pressure situations global can rise to the occasion, but oftentimes, if it's really like multiple people are having bad games and they're just kind of edging out the game, then it's not a good look, and XLG can edge out the win. And so for this, my predictions is, I would say it would be a good sign for GE to win 2-0. If they lose, or if they win 2-1, then that's iffy signs, and they most likely get picked first in a field where there's a Foot energy, Lev, and Vitality.